Welcome, everyone. Today we are talking about thyroid-healthy breakfast with Ginny Mahar of Hypothyroid Chef. We know that there are some foods that can support our thyroid and some foods that can be problematic for our thyroid and overall health. And when we are trying to eat a thyroid-healthy diet, sometimes it can be frustrating to get, inspiration or motivation in the kitchen. And so today, Ginny is going to talk a little bit about the tenets of a thyroid-healthy diet, and then also give us some ideas and recipes for what we can be eating for breakfast when we're eating a thyroid-healthy diet. Ginny is the face behind Hypothyroid Chef. She has been blogging for many years. She's a thyroid health and cooking coach. She's also a cordon bleu trained chef. So she's taken her expertise in the kitchen and applied it to her own thyroid journey, and is now spreading her knowledge and wisdom and her expertise to the rest of the thyroid community. So Ginny, I won't take up too much more time here. I'll pass it over to you to tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do, and then we can dive into thyroid healthy breakfasts. And for those of you that are joining us today, we'll have some time for live Q&A at the end. So go ahead and drop your questions into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of them as possible at the end. So I'll pass it over to you, Ginny.
Thanks so much, Katie. I'm so happy to be here. Always love collaborating with you and the Paloma team. You all are such an awesome resource, and always happy to connect and share this with other thyroid thrivers. So thanks so much for having me. So I guess I'll just start maybe in introducing myself. Ginny Mahar, also known as Hypothyroid Chef. I've been blogging thyroid healthy recipes and lifestyle at Hypothyroid Chef since 2015. For several years, I also ran Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid-30, but that's no longer around. So I'm at Hypothyroid Chef is the best place to find me. And I guess, just to give you a little bit of my story, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism in 2011, shortly after I became a mom. And for the first 4 years of that, I was under the typical standard of care of just TSH testing alone and levothyroxine. And, while I was grateful that my doctor caught that I even had hypothyroidism, I really wasn't feeling well. I was sick all the time, tired all the time. Yes, I was a new mom, but it was like, I don't feel like myself. This is not normal for me. And eventually I hit rock bottom, learned that I needed a complete thyroid panel, found a new doctor. And one of the first things that my new doctor, who's more, holistically, functionally oriented, taught me and talked to me about was food. And, food isn't the only aspect of thyroid healthy living. Obviously, we got to look at our labs and our treatment, optimize our meds, look at those root cause factors, work with our healthcare practitioner to address all those things. But diet and lifestyle, and especially food, which is sort of what I specialize in, really is foundational to what I call my house of health, and was foundational to me reclaiming my health and feeling better. And once I started implementing thyroid healthy eating, it really was just a few months before I got my life back, I got my energy back. And the way I always describe it is it was like somebody turned the lights back on inside me after 4 years of them being off. So that was a real eye-opening moment for me, and definitely fueled my fire to want to spread the word to others and share my journey and my resources and my recipes with them to help other thyroid thrivers stay inspired with this and on the thyroid healthy path, and to ultimately just harness the power of food. I mean, this is a big deal, and there's so much about it that is beneficial to us, not just in terms of our thyroid health and reducing thyroid related symptoms, but just overall in keeping ourselves, feeling as best as we can possibly feel. So that is sort of how I ended up here. My background is in food. I'm a cordon bleu trained chef and cooking instructor, and that's what I was doing when, I ended up with hypothyroidism, which I eventually learned was Hashimoto's. and, started blogging Thyroid-Healthy recipes and creating Thyroid-Healthy recipes and working with a lot of the leading doctors and experts and nutritionists in this field, and gleaning from all their wisdom and sort of finding my own, the essence, I guess, of what all those experts agree on and are shouting from the rooftops about, anti-inflammatory eating for gut health, eating to improve our nutrient density and things like that, cutting out foods that we're sensitive or intolerant to calm things like the autoimmune response. There's all these experts sort of give this topic their own thumbprint, but there is that sort of common essence. And so that's sort of what how I approach this topic. As far as thyroid healthy eating goes, I think one of the main takeaways is that there is no one size fits all diet. As I kind of mentioned, I think thyroid healthy eating is anti-inflammatory, it's gut health supportive, it's nutrient dense, and ultimately it's personalized because we all have unique dietary triggers. But there are some common rocks to look under. Gluten, for example, is the #1 dietary trigger. After that, things like dairy, sugar, soy, grains, nightshades, alcohol. It really depends on the individual, on your health circumstances, and things like that. So ultimately, I think a big part of the process and what diets like the autoimmune protocol do is they give us an opportunity to eliminate potentially problematic foods, see how we feel without them, notice how our symptoms improve, and then try reintroducing them, some of them. I mean, obviously, there's things like processed foods and refined oils, and maybe for a lot of us, gluten really doesn't have a place in a thyroid healthy diet. There may be things we decide we don't want to reincorporate, but ultimately the goal is this whole foods based, colorful, nutrient dense, diet that supports our health and vitality and energy, and avoids foods that, particular to us, may be inflammatory, irritating, might spike our antibodies and things like that. So it really depends on the individual. And here's the thing with breakfast. If any of you have been through this process or started this process, which I'm sure many of you have, you quickly realize, like, okay, this is cool. I'm going to try giving up gluten, or I'm going to try going paleo and see how that goes. Or maybe I'm going to do the autoimmune protocol, or, whatever me and my healthcare provider have decided is, the right step for me as far as incorporating thyroid healthy eating. I'm going to try that. And then you wake up the next morning and realize there's nothing I can eat for breakfast. I think a lot of those traditional breakfast foods really fall under those, really common dietary triggers, especially gluten and dairy and sugar. Things like pancakes, bagels, waffles, toast, cereal with milk, yogurt. All of that stuff kind of gets 86'd off the menu. So breakfast is a question I get a lot. It's a bugaboo and a pain point for a lot of people, because it does take some time to adjust to a new mindset around breakfast. So, I think that maybe I'll start with some tips around breakfast, and namely that first step is just keeping an open mind and knowing that this is going to take time. It's going to be an adjustment. Give yourself some grace and some patience with that, and know that with a little bit of time, you're going to be crushing this. It's like, I take it for granted because I've been doing this, since 2015 really is when I think my thyroid healing journey began, when I found my new doctor and started making those dietary changes. Now it's just my new normal, and it becomes that way, and it can become that way for you too. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and frustrated by this, just stick with it, keep an open mind, and know that you'll get there. I think one of the biggest parts of that mindset shift is knowing that breakfast can be anything. Like, for example, leftovers from last night's dinner in a lot of cases are probably ideal to a lot of those typical breakfast foods. They're higher in nutrients, higher in fiber, lower in sugar in many cases. You know, breakfast can be soup, it can be salad, it can be a cup of bone broth, it can be some wilted greens and a scrambled egg, or, you know, some shredded chicken or something like that. So really, breakfast can be anything. And I know that's a big leap for people. So we are going to talk a lot in a minute about specific, you know, more breakfasty foods. Also, I think, you know, there's so many silver linings of the thyroid healing journey. And I think one of them is getting away from a lot of those traditional breakfast foods, because so many of them can just be a blood sugar nightmare, like pancakes with syrup. You know, it just, you're going to have a major blood sugar spike over that. So many, even yogurt, a lot of yogurt is just loaded with sugar. And gluten-free substitutes for like gluten-free waffles and things like that are often no better. So it is important to try to avoid that trap of the gluten-free replacement foods, and instead really just try to make that mindset shift around breakfast, which is a really high impact meal and a great opportunity for us to like boost our nutrition and improve our overall diet and nutrient consumption. And then, you know, kind of along the same lines, I think to think about starting the day with something savory versus sweet, and always try to include some protein for that blood sugar balance. You know, that's a really, there's a big growing body of research around blood sugar balance and how important that is. And also protein is really important for thyroid drivers, because not only does it help tame those blood sugar spikes, but it can help repair our intestinal cells, which gut health is, you know, important for so much about our health. But it can also even help us produce thyroid hormones. And a lot of us aren't getting enough protein, according to the experts. So, you know, really great to incorporate that with the first meal of the day. And then my last tip before we start talking food is to try to do some batch cooking, like on your weekend, whenever your weekend is, make a big batch of, say, homemade breakfast sausage or frittata or one of the other breakfasts that we'll talk about. And that's just going to help you start the week off right and build on that momentum. You know, I'm a busy mom. I work, I have a kid in school. Like, mornings can be really hectic, and having something on hand, especially for breakfast, that you can just reheat and eat, or even grab and go if you need to, can be really, really helpful. And when you have that win and you start the week off on the right foot that way with some thyroid healthy meals on hand, especially breakfast, it sets you up for, you know, continued success throughout the week. So we want to string those wins together. So moving on, I'd love to talk about, you know, some thyroid healthy breakfast ideas. And maybe I'll start kind of according to dietary needs, because obviously we're not all on the same dietary approach. You know, for one person, just going gluten-free is a huge step, and it's maybe the right step for them. I'm a huge believer in the power of smaller steps and going at your own pace and building on those wins over time. And in other cases, you know, maybe you and your healthcare practitioner decide that really something a little bit more intensive, like the autoimmune protocol or the paleo diet, that eliminates more foods at once and gives you a wider opportunity to eliminate and then reintroduce foods to discover your bio-individual needs. Maybe that's the right step for you. So, you know, those common dietary templates that thyroid drivers use start with gluten-free, and then I'd say gluten and dairy-free is very common. After that, paleo is very common. And then after that, elimination diets like the autoimmune protocol, sort of going in order of like how many foods each of those diets eliminates. So we can just start with gluten-free, I guess. So, a lot, and again, this is a lot of the traditional stuff goes out the window just with gluten alone. So one of my favorite gluten-free breakfasts, and this is also in many cases paleo compliant, is frittata. So frittata is like a crustless quiche. I love frittata because, when we're eating thyroid healthy, we're trying to get the best quality food we can. We're going for the grass finished beef. We're going for the pastured pork and poultry, the wild seafood, the organic produce. We're spending a little bit more on food, especially now. So minimizing food waste is good. And things like frittata are great to clean out those bits and bobs from your produce drawer. So basically you take a heavy skillet, heat it up, add some healthy fat. Maybe you're using olive oil, maybe you like ghee, or even, some people use solid fats like leaf lard. Heat it up, saute some veggies, maybe some onions, some garlic, some wilted greens. In the summertime, I love to use this as a way to use up those extra greens from the garden that, it's like, this is more than we can possibly eat until I put it in a pan and this much greens becomes this much, So you saute up those greens. You can add anything, peppers, mushrooms, homemade breakfast sausage. I like to add nutritional yeast to mine for like a cheesy flavor that's dairy free, that also provides a lot of B vitamins. Once you get that sort of filling mixture cooked down, all you do is whisk. I usually do about 8 eggs. Whisk your eggs and pour that in, stir it together, and then you can pop that into, say, a 300-degree oven just until the top of the egg mixture is set. And that's it. And you just cut that into wedges like you would a quiche. Frittata is awesome because that's 8 servings of high protein breakfast where you can pack lots of veggies and stuff in there. So going, with the egg route, another really simplified, thing you can do for breakfast is just scrambled eggs and greens. A lot of people like those pre-washed baby greens. Take a handful of those. Maybe you take the time to mince up a clove of garlic or a shallot or a little onion or something. Throw your greens in there, season them a bit, crack a couple eggs in, and that's an amazing breakfast. You can also turn that into like a breakfast taco using a grain-free tortilla. I really like Siete's tortillas. They make both cassava, which is grain and legume free, and they make chickpea flour tortillas that are very good, high fiber. I find them to be a little bit more sturdy than the cassava tortillas, but both are wonderful. And you put your scrambled eggs in there. Maybe you like hot sauce. Maybe you dice up some tomatoes. That's a 5-minute breakfast right there. Of course, if you're just gluten-free, you have a lot more options as far as incorporating dairy and being able to still eat your yogurt and things like that. And also, you can do things like gluten and grain-free waffles. I do have some waffle recipes that I really like in my Thyroid-Healthy Everyday Cookbook that use things like buckwheat flour. And so, lots of nutrient density in that, lots of fiber, lots of great, health benefits. I do a pumpkin spice chocolate chip one. And going back to that tip of, incorporating a little bit of extra time on the weekends to do some batch cooking, waffles that way can be a great weekend project because I'll make a double batch. I'll have obviously eat waffles for breakfast that morning, and then I'll cool the rest off, put them in a stasher bag and freeze those. Like we don't need Eggos. We can make our own, healthier waffles. So, and a lot of those are also, you can do paleo compliant waffles as well. So there is some flexibility there. Another really favorite breakfast is chia pudding. Very easy to do, very nutrient dense. Chia seeds provide a lot of fiber, a very significant dose of fiber, as well as omega-3 fats, which are, very anti-inflammatory, and even some plant-based protein. And I just posted a recipe for horchata chia pudding on my blog that takes less than 5 minutes to whip together, using light coconut milk, a little bit of almond extract, some cinnamon, and I use a little bit of stevia, but if you weren't into stevia, you could just use a little natural sweetener like maple syrup. Stir that together and let it sit in the fridge for at least a few hours so that the chia seeds have time to gel. And also that step of gelling the chia seeds also makes the nutrients in them more bioavailable to the body. So that's an important step. And then you take that, you've got 4 servings of breakfast, throw some fresh berries on top, maybe some sliced almonds, some toasted coconut, maybe you've got some cacao nibs in the pantry. There's all kinds of things you can put on top of that chia pudding. So that's another wonderful gluten-free and also dairy-free breakfast. And then granola, if you are just gluten-free, you can use certified gluten-free oats to make more of a traditional granola. I've got a couple recipes on the blog for coconut macadamia granola and another chocolate cherry almond granola. So I love to do stuff like that when I have company coming or around the holidays as an edible homemade gift. So next, maybe let's shift into like people who are on a little bit more restricted diets like paleo and AIP. So like on the autoimmune protocol, you're talking about no seeds, no nuts, no eggs. That's where things get, I think, especially tricky, because now you've really cut out like even the savory breakfast foods like the eggs. That can be kind of tough. And so that mindset shift of, okay, breakfast can be anything is very key here when you're doing the autoimmune protocol or something like that. Smoothies, I think, can be a really good option when you're on a very restrictive elimination diet. Now, of course, you want to be careful of excess sugar, but here's my basic smoothie formula. I do a bunch of fruits and veggies. Usually I love to do frozen berries because they're very nutrient dense. They add sweetness. And as far as fruits go, they're typically lower in sugar than other fruits. Then I like to supplement that with some kind of neutral tasting veggies. Celery, I find, works really, really well. Adds a lot of fiber, water, and doesn't have like an overpowering taste. Then for liquid, I'll use usually either coconut water or light coconut milk, depending on how much, extra fat I'm going for. I am one of those people who, really has a hard time losing excess weight as a Hashimoto's patient. So, I'm always trying to look for ways to get enough healthy fats without like overdoing it. So lately I typically do coconut water for the liquid. And then for protein, I have some protein powder I like. You can use collagen powder. I often do, but keep in mind that collagen is not a complete protein. That doesn't mean it's not very, very good for you. It just know that it isn't that type of protein that your body can very easily use to build and maintain muscle. And then some ice, and then for my healthy fats, I typically like to stir in either a scoop of chia seeds or a scoop of ground flax meal. And so then you're just, in addition to those healthy fats, you're also getting fiber. And, every time I make smoothies, I always make a triple batch. I have one that morning, and then I've got 2 more glass jars in the fridge that I can just grab and go. And those are great for busy mornings. When I have a lot of work to do, I can drink one at my desk. So those are definitely a favorite. One thing I want to mention about smoothies to the thyroid audience is that greens, green smoothies are really popular, and it is recommended that we do cook greens before adding them to our smoothies. If you're into that, I would never want to discourage anyone from eating more greens, but a lot of greens like kale, spinach, arugula, chard, they're considered goitrogenic. They have some thyroid inhibiting properties. Now, a lot of experts now have kind of done a 180 on this topic of goitrogens and say, eat them. These are some of the healthiest foods on the planet. All those cruciferous vegetables, all those greens, go ahead and eat them. But to reduce any potential goitrogenic or thyroid inhibiting properties of those foods, you do want to be sure to cook them first whenever possible, especially if you're one of those people who's like, every morning I do a green smoothie with kale. Now, here's the great news about that. And what I love to use if I put greens in my smoothie is I always have a bag of frozen kale and a bag of frozen spinach in my freezer. Both of those are blanched before they're frozen. Also, it's already clean, chopped up. You don't even have to wash it, chop it, anything like that. You just have, your frozen greens pre-blanched, pop them in the blender, you're good to go. So just something to keep in mind and be aware of as far as like best practices go for, thyroid healthy smoothies. Another thing I really like along the same line of smoothies, but especially in the colder months, like I live in Montana and there's a lot of the year, I'm like, I'm cold all the time. I don't want an icy cold smoothie. So in the colder months, I do a lot of breakfast soup. And this is really similar, except that, in that it's put in the blender and pureed. You can make a huge batch. Most of them freeze really well. And then you can reheat and eat. It's a great grab and go. It's a great, desk breakfast. If you have to do something like that, obviously it's more ideal if we don't have to eat on the go, but we're talking about real world solutions here, right? So breakfast soup is great. And the concept is very simple. You take your veggies, maybe your greens, depending on what you have on hand. There's one I do with beets and sweet potatoes that I either roast or steam. And then I add a bunch of ginger and maybe some fresh orange juice. And then for most of the liquid, I add bone broth. So wonderful, wonderful, gut nourishing, nutrient dense breakfast, a great way to pack in veggies. That ginger beet breakfast soup is really good. It's really, if you love beets, beets are one of my favorite, thyroid healthy foods, bright red. But you can also use a lot of those greens. I have a recipe on my blog for zucchini basil breakfast soup. And that's another great one in the summertime when you've got more zucchini than you know what to do with in your garden and lots of fresh herbs. And also you could do something with some of those frozen greens. If I don't want to chop anything, throw some garlic, some onions. If you eat white potatoes or even white sweet potatoes, which are AIP friendly, throw some of those in there to give it a little body. Add your bone broth, season to taste, puree it. That's a wonderful AIP friendly breakfast is breakfast soup. Breakfast salad, also so simple, so good, just kind of broken down. Take a handful of baby greens, maybe some homemade breakfast sausage, some fresh berries, and bonus points if you add a scoop of fermented sauerkraut for, an extra dose of probiotics. And then I just drizzle the top with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, maybe a spritz of lemon juice. And that's a wonderful breakfast. That'll make you feel amazing. I've got a couple more. Breakfast hash is also really easy to do. There's 1,000,001 combinations. So that technique, I typically take ground meat or breakfast sausage, brown it up really good in like a cast iron skillet, take the meat out, and then I'll leave some of the drippings from that in the pan and add my onions, my garlic, other veggies. Again, whatever you have on hand. You could do carrots, sweet potatoes, celery root. If you do nightshades, you can do bell peppers, zucchini, use some fairly high heat, get a little color on everything. Hash, I think, is really good when you've got like some little brown crusty bits here and there. And then at the end, you can throw in a couple handfuls of fresh spinach or, any kind of greens you have in your fridge. Those will wilt down. You're just, you're packing in that nutrient density. And if you want, and if you can eat eggs, obviously eggs are not AIP compliant on the elimination phase, but if you are paleo, you could top that hash with a poached egg. And that's a wonderful weekend breakfast batch cooking project. And then you've got, it makes a big batch. You've got 2 or 3 more breakfasts in the fridge to start the week with. So, and then the last one, and I've kind of mentioned this already a few times, is big batch breakfast sausage. It's so easy to make your own sausage. I mean, all you're really doing is taking ground meat, adding your herbs, your seasonings, aromatics like onion and garlic, plenty of salt and spices. I love allspice in breakfast sausage. I like to add a little touch of maple syrup in breakfast sausage. I usually do 3 pounds at a time, mix that up. I'll make it into patties, cook it all up at once on a weekend. Then I've got some sausage patties I can add to, say, a lower protein breakfast like a smoothie or that chia pudding, to get my protein levels where I want them to be. That homemade breakfast sausage is a really great supplement. And then I might take a pound of that and not cook it up, put it in a stasher bag, freeze it. And then I've got something to start a batch of frittata with or a breakfast hash with. So those are just the homemade breakfast sausage, I think, is really a wonderful staple and a great sort of batch cooking project. So yeah, so those are my ideas as far as, different dietary restrictions go. I had a few kind of grab and go breakfast ideas, but I want to check in with you, Katie, and see how our audience is doing, if we have any questions or.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hungry now listening to you. I also love the idea that breakfast soup is just a hot smoothie, basically. I love this reframe of, when you can eat soup. We do have a couple questions from people that are tuning in. So maybe I can ask you those. And then if we want to do a couple grab and go ideas before we log off.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Couple questions. You talked a little bit about AIP or elimination diets to figure out your food sensitivities. The question is for you, and maybe you haven't tried them, but do you have thoughts on food sensitivity tests? Is this a useful tool for people to figure out what they might particularly be sensitive to? And just to add on to that, I know that can be frustrating for people because an elimination diet can take a long time and people are looking for immediate results. Any thoughts on food sensitivity testing?
Yes. Happy to share my thoughts. Obviously not a doctor. I have heard a lot of doctors talk about this because it is kind of controversial. A lot of, healthcare practitioners feel like the results from food sensitivity testing are not reproducible. And so they can be kind of misleading to some people. Here's my experience with food sensitivity testing. It's one of the first things that my new doctor did with me. And she kind of gave me that caveat, this is sort of a grain of salt thing. Just because you see something on here doesn't always mean it's like a cut and dry, black and white, you can never eat this food. However, I saw things on there that were eye-opening and motivating to me. One of them, for example, was that every single kind of egg, chicken, duck, egg white, egg yolk, every part of eggs, I was like, boo, my test results lit up, you are sensitive to these. And prior to pregnancy and hypothyroidism, I was having major stomach issues. They could never diagnose it. I did all this testing, thousands of dollars of testing. I'd be doubled over in pain randomly. I was eating a lot of eggs because it was this gluten-free, high protein breakfast option. And I was eating too many eggs. And when I saw the food sensitivity test results, it was like, oh, maybe I should think about this. My grandfather was sensitive to eggs, my mother, my son has an egg sensitivity, and I do too. Now, for me, that doesn't mean I can't eat any eggs, but my food sensitivity test kind of gave me that light bulb moment and motivated me to try eliminating and reducing eggs in my diet. And where I got to is, if I just sort of, keep track of how many eggs I'm eating and don't overdo it, I can do eggs and I don't have debilitating stomach pain. So for me, food sensitivity testing was very valuable that way. I think it is just a good idea to maybe keep in mind, like, take it with a grain of salt and use it as a tool to learn more about yourself, but just, yeah. I would recommend it, and I would do it again. Yeah.
I think that's helpful to hear, to use it as an educational tool, the same way an elimination diet or AIP can be educational. You're not giving up food forever, but it can be helpful to you as you figure out what works for you. I think that's a good frame of mind.
Yeah.
Whitney has a question about caffeine. The question is, what about caffeine intake on AIP? I know you're not supposed to have it, but I have no energy to start my day without it. I would expand that to just ask about caffeine alternatives, possibly around breakfast time.
Yes. Oh, caffeine. Caffeine is, like, I think personally, it's been one of the hardest for me to give up, because I think a lot of it is the ritual of it, that something warm. I use Nut Pods, which is like a Whole30 compliant creamer. I love their French vanilla flavor. It doesn't have like added sugar and stuff. I love tea. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but so I totally get it. And this can be hard. And as far as like making a recommendation, as far as, is it okay for you or is it not, it's not really my place to do that. I think it really depends on the person, and it's very worthwhile with any of these elimination diets to see how you feel without it. One of the things that I've heard from the people I worked with as a health coach is, caffeine makes me really tired, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but obviously you drink it, you get that cortisol spike, you get the crash, it's affecting your blood sugar. So worthwhile to definitely take a look at. Some of my favorite caffeine alternatives, and what I've used when I've been trying to cut out caffeine, is dandelion tea. So Sip Herbals is a company that makes an AIP-friendly coffee substitute made with dandelion or chicory root, often roasted. You can also buy Ticinos, like a brand that I often have in my pantry. They make this dark roast that tastes almost just like coffee. So you get that warm cup, you can put your, maybe you have, like, if you're AIP, you could put a little simple coconut milk in there or something. I like to put a little honey in there. It has that taste, it has that ritual, and it satisfies that like comforting thing that we love in the morning. And while you're not necessarily getting the caffeine burst from it, you are getting the added benefit of a highly liver supportive food. Dandelion is like a well-known liver supportive supplement or tonic to just help support your body's detox pathways. And keep in mind, the liver is where up to 60% of your thyroid hormone conversion occurs. So liver support and supporting our detox pathways is super important. So, it's just like, well, now this cup of, chicory tea is even more appealing to me. Not only does it taste like coffee, which I can't handle the caffeine in coffee personally, but it scratches that comforting, morning cuppa itch and adds that, health benefit. So that's kind of my favorite. And I do also like green tea and matcha. There's a lot of health benefits around that. I think if you have to have something, and I've heard that from a lot of experts too, look, if you have to have something, try something like green tea, because you're going to get all these extra polyphenols and L-theanine, and green tea is also known to not create, because of that L-theanine, not create such a massive spike and then crash like more, intense forms of caffeine, such as coffee, can do. So those are kind of my two favorites as far as, coffee alternatives.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think hearing some brands is probably helpful for people to find alternatives. Our last question, Ginny, is about eating out. I think this one's specifically related to eating out, brunch with your friends. But the question is, like, how do you eat out when you have a thyroid condition? What are some tips you can use at restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're on a very restrictive diet, like, AIP, that does, like, the more restrictive your diet, obviously, the more tricky it's going to be to do things like eat out. Because even if you say want to order something like bacon, well, does the bacon have a lot of sugar in it? Was it made with nightshade spices? And things like that can be really tricky. And I definitely have some places that I know of here in my hometown that kind of seem to cater a little bit more to people with special dietary needs, where you can do sort of an a la carte. You can get something like wilted greens, or, hey, can I get a cup of that soup, or something like that. Now, if you're paleo, that does open up a little bit more, because then you can have eggs and you're not restricted from having nightshades. And in that case, I think breakfast is actually really easy, because you can do eggs and a side of sausage, bacon, ham, something like that. And the more, if you can add some fruit or veggies to that, great. Now, white potatoes, like hash browns, that can be a gray area as far as paleo goes. Some paleo proponents say no white potatoes. Some paleo proponents say they're fine. Potatoes are actually quite nutrient dense. They are a nightshade. So if you're sensitive to those, they're not an option. But, like if I'm traveling, say, and I go out to breakfast, my standard order would be a couple over easy eggs, hash browns, and bacon. Simple, basic, in my opinion, for my personal, approach to, let's say, my personalized paleo-ish diet, that's fine for me. So it depends on the individual, but yes, I that's a very common question, the eating out issue. And I think that's why, it's also so important when we're doing something like the autoimmune protocol to kind of plan for it. And maybe it's just best if you go, I have this trip coming up, I'm going to do, I'm going to commit to 6 weeks on AIP, but I'm going to wait until this trip is over until I start that, so I can give myself the best chance of success and of being able to stick to it, so that I can really see how I feel without any of these, questionable foods, including, like, at a restaurant, you might be getting something like a highly refined oil that your breakfast was prepared in. And that does make it very, very tricky. Yeah, I can't like sugarcoat that one. So.
No, I think that's helpful. And I can speak for myself, but something that was hard to overcome when I changed my diet was like just being gutsy enough to ask all the questions or ask for adjustments to my meal, and, be sort of what to me felt like being annoying to, my waiter or server, but like getting the information I need so I can make an informed food decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I mean, number one, you get to have needs and you get to make requests, and that's okay. Okay, so grab and go breakfast. I want to just preface this by saying, obviously it's best for us to be able to sit, be calm, take some centering breaths, like be present with our food and be in a relaxed rest and digest state when we consume our meals. That said, grab and go breakfast, it can be a real world solution for those busy mornings. I mean, maybe you have a plane to catch and you need something on the way out the door. So these may not be the most ideal breakfast, but I think they can help in a pinch. And they're sometimes what I turn to when, say, I'm traveling or something like that. I really do like Applegate Organics frozen sausage links. They make a sugar-free chicken sausage that can, really, they're these microwavable sausage links can give you a dose of protein in a pinch. Something like that, and a smoothie is a very, very quick breakfast. Another one is something like fruit or vegetables and some nut butter. You're getting your healthy fats and proteins from the nut butter. You could do something like a banana. It's like when I'm staying with friends, it seems like almost everybody has bananas at the house. Hey, do you have some bananas and peanut butter? Like if there's nothing else, that's something where I'm like, I can eat this, and maybe it's not like the ideal breakfast, but it's going to keep me on track with my personal dietary restrictions. Bone broth is another really great grab and go. And of course, you can buy bone broth. It's quite expensive to buy your own. It's really affordable to make your own. It does require, I typically do 24 hours of cooking. So you make that time investment. It takes 5 minutes to put it together with, some veggies, some bones, put it in a pot, herbs, salt, little bit of vinegar to help pull the minerals out of the bones. Simmer that for 24 hours, strain that, and then you can freeze that. And, a cup of bone broth can be one of those quick grab and goes, along with something like breakfast soup. If you want something more substantial than just the broth, combine that with some root vegetables or any kind of veggies, really, some savory herbs and things like that. Puree it, and you've got a breakfast soup. Big batch smoothies. Again, I always make 3. That's a grab and go. Grab it, stir in my flax seeds, put my straw in, and I can be out the door. That scrambled eggs with a handful of baby greens mixed in is another super fast one. You can put that, inside a cassava tortilla. And in a pinch, I do like keeping some clean paleo compliant bars on hand, like RX bars, really clean ingredient list. It's like nuts, dates, and egg whites pretty much. Is kind of the standard, formula for RX bars. And then if you're on the AIP, Epic Bison bars are an option that's AIP compliant, and you can have in your bag. You can, keep them in your hotel room or whatever it is, so that you can stay on track in those situations where you're in a rush or whatever. So yeah, I try not to rely too heavily on those packaged foods, but I do also always keep them on hand, because you just never know. I mean, life can be very busy. So
that's awesome. That's a lot of really good ideas. I've linked most of the things we've talked about. I linked your bone broth recipe here. So those that are here, feel free to scan up through the chat there and grab any links you're interested in. Ginny, thank you so much for so many good ideas and really laying a foundation for what it means to be eating thyroid healthy. And that we do have a lot of freedom and flexibility in eating this way to still eat good food. It doesn't have to be, boring and dry. So really appreciate your time. Really appreciate everyone that's joined us today. Thank you for bearing with us through our technical glitch. I think it turned out just fine. And we will send out this replay with all of Ginny's information so that you know where to find Hypothyroid Chef and all of her resources after this presentation. And we will see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thanks everyone for showing up today.